Greetings and felicitations.
Hip, hip, hurrah, tally-ho.
Hey, my little biscuit.
Hey, Puddin'.
What'd you think about this Roger Moore classic, first James Bond film ever, Live and Let Die?
Well, this one was kind of so-so to me.
It was pretty outrageous.
It had some good scenes, yeah.
It was one of those ones where you go, okay. So let's talk about the facts before we talk about the details of the movie. Directed by Guy Hamilton and produced by Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli. Based on Live and Let Die by Ian Fleming. Starring Roger Moore for the first time as James Bond, Yaphet Kotto, and Jane Seymour. George Martin did the music. Eon Productions distributed by United Artists. The release date, June 27th, 1973. 121 minutes long. Budget, $7 million. Box office, a whopping $161 million.
Amazing.
Total success. So if there was any doubt that Roger Moore had established himself as the James Bond of the 70s, this proved it. And in fact, when they released this James Bond, I think it was in the year late 70s or early 80s in Britain, it was the top release to watch on TV. Like, it broke records. Everyone wanted to see Roger Moore as James Bond, and many already knew him as The Saint, another classic spy show from the 60s.
Yeah, he was already popular. And he's, he has that handsome, suave look.
Oh, very much so. He was the oldest Bond at the time. He was in his mid-40s. But that's the best way to describe him. He was very suave. He was told not to raise his eyebrow because that was a signature move of his when he was in The Saint, which made sense because he had to differentiate the character because they had the same look, short hair, clean-shaven, wearing a suit. So I think that made sense. Roger Moore really held his own in this movie and became a new James Bond. And it wasn't just the way he came across as a new James Bond. They purposely wanted him to be a different James Bond. And this is where I have some of the problems. They didn't want him to order a martini. Instead, they had him order whiskey. He didn't smoke cigarettes. He smoked cigars. I think some of those changes were a little bit jarring. There were too many too soon when you watch the movies in order.
I mean, those little things are still things that we associate with Bond. So, yeah, it was different to see James Bond doing those things. I mean, and it's hard for us to look at it a certain way because when we just rewatched the movie, but we were already familiar with Roger Moore as James Bond. And so, I mean, the audiences back then seeing him for the first time in this part, it must have been even more jarring.
This is the one we grew up with. So, I mean, we love him. But let's talk about the movie right at the beginning. You have the opening action sequence, but then you have the credits with the song, Live and Let Die. I mean, I love this song. To have Paul McCartney sing a James Bond tune, this is epic.
This was a great song. I mean, yeah, this was a great pop song, and it was so dramatic. Yeah, it was like one of the most important parts of the movie, really.
Oh, it was fierce. I just remember hearing it as a kid saying, man, this is a badass song. Guns N' Roses did a cover of it later on in the 90s, and Axl's version was equally, if not more, vicious. It was just, this is one of those songs that's definitely in my top Bond songs of all time, but for a different way that the other classic ones were. So, again, they were looking to make changes with the whole Bond franchise at this point. First time we've ever had a black Bond villain. It was a concern of the producers. Like this, you could tell there were so many things that were just of a different mindset of years ago. He wasn't allowed to go to the premiere or to do any press because they were afraid of the public reactions to a black man being the main Bond villain. Like, it's one of those things you hear about that and you're like, really?
Well, the thing is but what they had in mind for the movie was, the idea that it would be more about black people and the
very much
Caribbean
so.
culture, voodoo, because it was that time period where there were more movies that focused on what now we call blaxploitation.
Oh, those Pam Grier movies, a lot of them were just outrageous, of course. And this movie wasn't allowed, or at least scenes of it weren't allowed to be shown in South Africa and in Japan, because you couldn't have Bond, a white man, be with a black woman. Like, things that we take for granted now, and we're just like, wow, even in the 70s, that was an issue. It
had the other controversial things, the racial epithets, like saying honky.
Oh, I thought that was hysterical. As a kid, my brother and I thought that was absolutely hysterical.
I mean, it's a word to us now that's like, I guess it's old fashioned to us.
But I'm saying, like, we grew up watching Sanford and Son and the Jeffersons. Like, you know, you're kind of used to it. But I mean, we learned about it from watching shows like that, Sanford and Son, the Jeffersons, Good Times. But here's the thing. We always take movies and say, what was it like watching this movie when you were younger compared to when we rewatch it as an adult? When I was younger, you know what I didn't like about this movie? I thought it was too much comedy in it. Too much outrageousness in it. I thought that they were taking the James Bond character not seriously enough. Whereas now I look at it as an adult and I just view it as it was par with the course of early 70s movies.
Well, Roger Moore has been called the Bond that's less serious. I mean, that's the reason some people didn't like him as much.
Yes. We're going to see he changes up a little bit as time goes on, but this movie was such a stark contrast to some of the earlier Bonds that we saw, especially the George Lazenby one. You know, previous Sean Connery did have a little bit of goofiness when he was in Las Vegas, but this movie, it's very much a timepiece of the 70s.
I mean, it is good to change it, though. I mean, that James Bond is acting differently now, because if they had kept the same formula all the time, you know they would have worn it out.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Yaphet Kotto as Kananga. What'd you think of him as a Bond villain?
He was a good villain.
I liked him. I thought he was fantastic. Dual roles, a drug dealer, and the head of this fictional island nation. First time in a Bond that we don't have a real world location.
Yeah, they decided to make up something for this one.
The plot was excellent. We're dealing with, because that was on people's minds, even though this was based on a book. In fact, it was the second Bond novel. I know Matt Sherman's going to talk more about that, but it totally made sense. This was what was on people's mind. Inner city issues were on people's minds. So when they were filming on location in Harlem, it really brought Bond into the real world of New York in the 1970s. And that's when Harlem was super rough. I mean, you go there now, it's pretty nice actually. But apparently the film crew had to pay local gangs to protect them during this time period, because you didn't want to be a white person in Harlem in 1970, early 1970s.
Well, that's interesting they did that, but at least they still were able to film there.
Jane Seymour?
I love Jane Seymour.
Fantastic.
Yes.
She ended up being a big star. I mean, I thought her role was wonderful in here, especially how they presented her with that really cool robe that would lock around her.
She wore the exotic wardrobe in this. It was very nice. And the fact that they had the magic in this one, the way she did the cards, telling the future, and all of the magic, the voodoo in this movie, it was interesting. I still think the plot, the whole thing kind of was slow in some places, but I liked Jane Seymour, the use of her, and the use of the villain.
And using that as a plot device, having drug shipments going from the Caribbean into the United States, that was new plot device for Bond. And having supernatural elements, this was a first for Bond. I mean, this movie was so radically different than the previous Bond films.
The most memorable scene to me was the funeral parade type thing.
Oh, yeah. New Orleans?
It was, yes, in New Orleans, but it was so weird. You had the people that were sad because someone died, and crying, and then all of a sudden they get happy and start dancing. It was It was just so weird.
Clifton James. This is the first time we see him as Chef Pepper. He reminds me of like a Fitzgerald, Georgia Police Department officer.
Oh, yeah. or Dukes of Hazzard. You know?
Yeah, we can see that model would be used in later on films like that character, but I'm glad this is the first appearance that we see of Sheriff Pepper. Julius Harris as Teehee, a Bond villain with a prosthetic arm. I love it. Larger-than-life villains. We're seeing that more so as we go forward. We saw it in the past. We're going to see more in the future with Roger Moore. What'd you think about Teehee?
The idea of having villains that are kind of like super villains, like the superhero villains, there's something different about them.
Yes.
They're not all human exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the characters that were developed in this movie were excellent, and the actors that portrayed these characteristics were wonderful. You know, there are a lot of crocodile scenes that were used with real crocodiles, and it was very difficult working with them because I didn't realize this, but crocodiles could jump in the air. So that was one of the fears, is that the crocodiles would jump over the bridge.
Wow. That was a good scene with Bond, walking on the crocodiles.
Oh, it was exciting. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that was one of the,
That's like pre-Indiana Jones.
Exactly. like, how is he going to get out of this, you know?
And Roger Moore had numerous injuries and illnesses during the production. But he played it off. You'd never guess it.
Can you imagine he had kidney stones during the movie and
busted up his teeth.
I mean,
twisted his knee.
Yeah, you can imagine a lot of injuries from doing the stunts, even though
I was surprised that he was doing some of his own stunts at all.
I know but the actors always say they want to do some of the stunts so that it looks more realistic. But yeah, he did probably too many to get that many injuries.
Mm-hmm. I was glad that we're seeing gadgets in the movie, and in fact, Roger Moore has stated that one of his favorite gadgets that he used was that magnetic watch, that Rolex. But
they didn't have Q in this.
That was very frustrating because I love Desmond Llewellyn as Q.
Yeah, that was strange. It's one of the few Bond movies that didn't have him.
Mm-hmm. So yes, we did have some gadgets, but I always like it better when Q presents them, and when Bond has his quips with Q over the gadgets. We see Bond getting his information from his apartment so he doesn't go into M's office. So, again, we're deviating from the Bond that we know, but nothing distracted me from saying this is not James Bond. We've seen distraction before, but Roger Moore held it out with class, distinction. He got this role even though Sean Connery turned it down. I mean, Sean Connery was offered over $5 million, which was considered huge at that time. So he got it because Sean didn't want it.
I mean, you know, Sean Connery had to be tired of this role to turn that down. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, you know, he still made a lot of money doing other movies.
No, it wasn't going to be the last time we see him in movies or as James Bond. And apparently Roger Moore's wife was on the set and made it very uncomfortable for the scenes with Roger and Madeline Smith. I'd imagine, yes, look, I'm saying as a man, it's already uncomfortable. You just do what you have to do as a professional. Well, but I think that's funny he had his wife on the set with him.
Yeah, it's what all actors have to do. They probably have to do that at some point. And usually, you know, for the romance scenes where there's any kind of nudity, they'll have it a closed set, so only certain people can be there. And there was also talk that Jeremy Britt was one of the people they considered to play Bond. Very strange. Sherlock Holmes as Bond.
It's one of those things that you look at and say, could it happen? Like, we know him so well as Sherlock Holmes. Could he have been James Bond? Would the public accept that?
Yeah, I couldn't imagine it.
You know what? Maybe. I don't think that's too outrageous. Felix Leiter was back, though. That was something that is a throwback from previous movies.
Yes, bringing back that character, but still with a different actor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wonder how many people really made the connection that he's supposed to be playing the same character. So the boat chase was filmed in Louisiana around the bayou area. And they said there were a few problems with flooding or some flooding that interfered with the filming at some times.
I could see that.
It actually made for a good scene. Even though that one I kind of thought ran kind of long, but it had some exciting stuff with the boats. And the speedboat jump over the bayou at the time set the Guinness World Record for the most feet jumped, 110 feet.
I mean, that's wild to consider that. And they weren't going for a record, right? It was something that just happened. And even the crash into the police car, that wasn't intentional as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, but that was
one of those
funny.
things. Yeah, it was one of those things that they had to keep on film, saying, "Wow, this looks really good." Now, when we talk about the movie, we have to say, like I say, right now, I enjoy it for what it is. I find it amusing. I find some of the parts of it fantastic. Some I just think is ridiculous. Like at the end with the blowing up of Mr. Big blowing up like a balloon. It's too ridiculous, but it is amusing.
Yeah.
So as much as I enjoy it with an asterisk. What are your final thoughts on the movie?
Well, the thing is, this one, the first time I saw it was on TV when I was a child, and I liked it more then.
So, I watched it on TV too. It was like a Sunday night movie.
Yeah, and
right?
and I already knew who Jane Seymour was then, and I liked her, you know.
Sure.
You know, but then when we watched it more recently, I didn't really enjoy it as much, but it still had some good parts.
Sure. What would you have changed in order for you to enjoy it more?
Having something like the action scenes not as long, and then I don't know, a few of the other scenes I thought with Kananga were kind of long with just the talking.
Yeah, I could see that. It was an interesting one to say the least. Let's roll the microphone over to Matt Sherman.
Hey StarPodlog listeners, Matt Sherman here of BondFanEvents.com and my new YouTube channel, James Bond Fan Events. We are talking about Live and Let Die. And I'm just as excited as I was talking about Diamonds Are Forever. Hopefully I won't run out of time before I run out of words, because I'm never going to run out of words about these two. Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die are both in my top 5 Bond movies and top 5 Ian Fleming novels. And let's start with the novel. The novel is dark. The novel is frightening. How did I know growing up reading the novels that when Bond is reading Patrick Leigh Fermor, and he's reading about voodoo in Jamaica, which is integral to the plot of Live and Let Die, how was I to know, until I grew up and started doing research, that Patrick Fermor was at Goldeneye, Ian Fleming's home, when he was working on his voodoo book. That's why Fleming was quoting it. It's also a strong book. So many interrelated connections. We know, if you know anything about Ian Fleming, StarPodlog listeners, you know he died as he lived. He lived 90 years of life in about 56 years, but his home away from home always was Jamaica, since he visited it in a rainy time in World War II. He built a magnificent villa of his own design, Goldeneye, very simple and box-like in construction, so that his friend, the famous raconteur, playwright, and actor Noel Coward called it Goldeneye, ear, nose, and throat, saying it looked like a doctor's clinic. But I've been to Goldeneye multiple times. It's a gorgeous place, and it inspired Fleming, along with the surround, to write many Bond novels. Jamaica falls its way into 6 or 7 Bond novels here and there, and most prominently Live and Let Die, where Mr. Big, Bonaparte Ignace Gallia, B.I.G., the notorious B.I.G., named after Napoleon and a French Caribbean villain, becomes Mr. Big. And of course, in the movie, we see Mr. Big as Yaphet Kotto, one of my favorite actors in the Bond films, playing 2 roles, one in prosthetic makeup as Mr. Big and one as Dr. Kananga of the fictional line of Sam Monique. So the novel is an exciting adventure. It's dark. And if you want to be introduced to the Fleming novels in a different kind of way, have you considered reading Live and Let Die in its graphic novel form? I wonder how many of you realize that Van Jensen, who's one of comics' most talented writers, has teamed up with the Ian Fleming publications and the heirs of Ian Fleming to take now both Casino Royale and Live and Let Die, the first two Fleming novels, and put them in graphic novel form. And your StarPodTrek hosts were with me at SpyCon Atlanta back in 2018, where we hosted Van Jensen, and we talked from the podium about his process, and the process of him abridging or adapting Live and Let Die and Casino Royale, and the text is rich. I mean, it's almost a full novel in both these texts. It's incredible. Was to visualize the scenes and make them come to life with tremendous artwork, tremendous foresight. And Van got to work with the Ian Fleming heirs. So, for example, he said, here's Bond at home lounging in his bathrobe in Casino Royale. And literally they said, hey, Uncle Ian would have had James in this color bathrobe, not this color. So he got as close as he could to the source material, the very family of Ian Fleming, to give you Fleming's text as visuals. Live and Let Die is a glossy read. It's a great read. And I was struck, even though I've read Live and Let Die multiple times as a novel, I was struck when I read the graphic novel and saw a lot of it come to life. The brutality of the violence, the rawness of the characters. Live and Let Die is a very good novel, and for many American fans, it's very high on their list because of the wonderful American locations. I grew up in New York City and out on Long Island, and I moved to Florida as an adult. I've been in Florida many years now. And New York City and Florida locations are very prominent in Live and Let Die. I'm privileged to live about 15 minutes drive from where Mr. Big's men attacked Bond in solitaire using machine guns and grenades. So I have some wonderful locations in my own backyard. I always boast in Florida, as you StarPodTrek listeners know. We've done 7 James Bond films here, and several of the Ian Fleming novels use Miami as a location or nearby islands and the state of Florida. And Bond comes down to St. Petersburg, which at the time was the biggest retirement community in the United States. Bond has a lot to say about that. And this is where Felix Leiter gets attacked by a shark. This is where Solitaire gets abducted. This is where Bond goes off the rails a little bit and is determined to smash Mr. Big and blow him apart in Jamaica. Live and Let Die is an exciting novel. It was Ian Fleming's second novel, so it's very raw. Author Raymond Benson has distincted the first 7 Fleming books from the last 7 in the Bond canon, saying it's really 2 different Bonds, and one would be inclined to agree with him. This is early Bond, exciting Bond, razzle-dazzle Bond. Live and Let Die is a great read. The movie is a big departure from the novel. The movie comes about 20 years after the novel was written, and Roger Moore's first Bond is Live and Let Die, the film. Roger Moore loved cigars. He had a bout with throat cancer many years ago, before he passed, sadly, a couple of years ago. And it was in large part from smoking cigars and enjoying really fine cigars, too. Expensive Cuban cigars. As a matter of fact, on the Live and Let Die shoot, one of the conditions of his hire was that he was allowed, it was in his contract, to smoke as many fine cigars as he wanted, charge them to the production. And for Live and Let Die, he smoked $8,000 worth of cigars. This was in 1973. So convert the money to 2021 money, and you'll see how much he smoked in wonderful cigars. As a matter of fact, we see a cigar twice in the film. We see Bond smoking a cigar while he's on a hang glider, and we see Bond smoking a cigar and using it to stop a snake that was put there to bite him in his San Monique hotel room. Speaking of hang gliders, that's the first appearance of a hang glider on a movie screen. At the time, now we think of hang gliding as kind of a common thing. Here in Florida, I can drive an hour from my home and do hang gliding, tandem hang gliding with an instructor. But the world's first hang gliders were brought to the rocky shores of Jamaica to tether Roger Moore from them. And Roger Moore did not like heights, and he was claustrophobic also, but he braved both of those things for the Bond movies. And he was on a crane 100 feet in the air. Somebody yelled cut on one of the scenes, so the crane abruptly stopped and jerked him, and he swung out like a stick on the end of a rope. He swung out high over the cliffs in Jamaica. Incredible. and hurt himself coming back down. I took fans to the spot because I found Mr. Big's house in Jamaica, which has long been a location people have craved to find, and I found the location and brought people down to Mr. Big's beach for our Jamaica tour. And, we've done multiple tours of Jamaica with fans, and we have one planned for 2022. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the first Bond film, Dr. No, and the 70th anniversary of the writing of Casino Royale, Ian Fleming's first novel. So we're going back to Jamaica, to GoldenEye. We're taking fans to Jamaica for a week. My wife Janine and I are taking fans there for a week to see Dr. No locations, Live and Let Die locations, No Time to Die locations, Ian Fleming's home, GoldenEye, Noel Coward's magnificent home with incredible views, the best in Jamaica, Firefly. Tons of locations from Ian Fleming. So if you want to see novel locations, film locations, visit us at bondfanevents.com, and you'll get really close to Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die as a film, as I said, is a departure from the book and features some of Tom Mankiewicz's sparkling wit, his ever-sparkling wit. He helped out on 4 Bond films and screenwrote Live and Let Die, and it is a gas. And also in the film, they go to New Orleans, one of my favorite cities of all time. I've been there many times. I love New Orleans. And Tom Mankiewicz was talking with the director on the shoot, Guy Hamilton, as they were doing their pre-production. And as many of you know, the director will influence the screenwriter and influence Michael Wilson, the production team, and suggest ideas. And Mankiewicz was explaining about the funerals down in New Orleans that are dancing and singing, and about the excitement of Mardi Gras, and thought Guy would love it and love the jazz scene, so they set some of the film in New Orleans. And the film opens with an Agent Hamilton being killed, and the agent is played by the son of a famous actor that Roger Moore's mother adored. Roger Moore grew up going to the actor's father's pictures. The actor was in semi-retirement, living nearby New Orleans in Slidell, where they wound up filming all the boat chases from them that die in the swamps. And the actor who plays Hamilton goes down, the coffin picks him up, as many of you know if you've enjoyed the film, and the jazz, dancing, and music begins. And one of the best things to do in the world that's fun is to be with a group of Bond fans in New Orleans on a tour and to join a funeral as it goes through the streets and as they play all these wonderful pieces of music like those you hear in Live and Let Die, and to dance around with them, because funerals are a rite of passage to a better place, the next world, and people dance and shout for joy, and boom, you're in the middle of Live and Let Die. Indeed, there's Preservation Hall, which is a wonderful place in New Orleans that people go. They get huge crowds every night of tourists to listen to the nightly jazz shows, and the Preservation Hall band was the band from Live and Let Die. They used local talent. They had hundreds of extras and costume and 100 crew down on the set, and Roger Moore and Jane Seymour was watching, and Gloria Hendry, and they partied every night in New Orleans for weeks. The producers of Live and Let Die, Cubby Broccoli, Harry Saltzman, famously at this point were worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they took out people every night. And the actors who were down there with us, because I've had several actors on tour with us in New Orleans, said every single night they went out dining to some amazing place in New Orleans, the very best in town. Brennan's, a couple of friends went there for brunch 2 years ago, and they dropped $250 on brunch, that kind of thing. And Harry and Cubby would take a whole half a room and host media friends who had come from as far as the UK on a plane, just interview Roger Moore, and throw parties every night and celebrate the Bond lavish lifestyle and treat people very well in the production. I remember asking Trina Parks, who was Thumper in Diamonds Are Forever. We were sitting in Atlanta. I was there with a group of friends. We were having lunch with Trina. We just talked about Diamonds Are Forever, the prior Bond film, and a previous StarPod logcast, as you know. And I said, Trina, what was your favorite film that you've done? You're primarily an actor, dancer, choreographer. You're a singer. Trina Parks is a great singer. But what was the favorite film you were ever on? She said, Diamonds Are Forever. I said, what was the second? She said, Diamonds Are Forever. I said, what was your third favorite film? She said, Diamonds Are Forever, because I was treated like gold on the film. I made great money, and I was treated so very well by the production team and the producers. And indeed, every actor I know who has done a Bond film loved their Bond film experience. And a part of the experience on Live and Let Die was if you were in the New Orleans group, even if you were like Gloria, who played Rosie Carver, and you weren't yet in any scenes, you're going to be in scenes in Jamaica. You were just flown to New Orleans to get to know everybody. Every single night they went out and they did the town, and they stayed in the best hotels, and So New Orleans is one of my favorite Bond tours to do, and we'll be touring New Orleans this October. We have a Bond cruise coming up for a week, October 10 to October 17. October 9 is Live and Let Die Day. If No Time to Die is still on schedule to premiere, the whole group of us 50 fans are going to watch it all on the big screen in New Orleans on the 9th. And we have tours of New Orleans and events planned for October 9, because I know New Orleans like the back of my hand. And downtown the French Quarter, there are, believe it or not, 24 locations from Live and Let Die, and even from the James Bond novels. So we're going to have a great time, and I'll take you around New Orleans, and you'll get to see one of my favorite cities. You'll get free time in New Orleans, and then we depart on a cruise to Key West and the Bahamas and dozens more James Bond locations. Believe it or not, we cram in about 90 locations, as well as seminars at sea, having fun together, a cosplay night, a formal night in tuxedo and dresses. We have a ball. Even if you don't have a tuxedo and you just want to wear a Bond bow tie, come along. With your Bond bow tie and your blue jeans, we'll have some fun. So check out our cruise at BondFanEvents.com and our events at our new James Bond Fan Events YouTube channel. What more can we say about Live and Let Die? There's a lot of action. Did you know, you may have known, that Tom Mankiewicz wrote in the place where we see the boat chase in the film, the greatest boat chase you ever saw, and that was his first draft for the script. And then they went around in a helicopter and they flew all over Slidell, which is north and a bit east of New Orleans, and across Lake Pontchartrain, and they started to sketch out this incredible boat chase. Now remember, when you see the great car chase of Diamonds Are Forever, the great boat chase of Live and Let Die, today we think, oh, it was pretty cool. But when these films came out in 71 and 73, these were incredible, and audiences shouted and applauded at the amazing stunts that were done on land and on water. Unbelievable stunts, fights, explosions, crashes. And I talk about this in my new book, Playing Games with James Bond. I would love for StarPodLog listeners to read it, enjoy it, comment on it. Had a lot of fun writing it, where I talk about the groundbreaking stunts, games, X games, if you will, of the James Bonds, as well as all the games we know and love, like Baccarat and golf and Mahjong, believe it or not. And Playing Games with James Bond is all about Bond the gamesman, Bond the action man. And Live and Let Die has tons of action. Tons and tons of action. Also, here's some interesting trivia. Live and Let Die is a film where Bond is captured by the bad guys, or the good guys, multiple times. The CIA capture him. The New York City police capture him, the NYPD. Mr. Big's men capture him in New Orleans, capture him in New York. He gets trapped in a revolving booth in New York's Filet of Soul, the bad guy's lair. He wants to avoid a revolving booth, so in New Orleans he takes a table, and that goes down to the floor, and he's captured again. He's knocked unconscious. He's beaten. But he always, like Bond does, comes out on top. So enjoy Live and Let Die. Pay attention to your StarPodLog hosts. They have a lot of insight on this film and on our prior film, Diamonds Are Forever. If you missed that, go back. And let's keep tracking with all the Bond films. I'm so appreciative of many of you who've gotten into the Ian Fleming stories and enjoyed these films in a new way. Some of you have never seen Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, because you've seen less obscure Bond films. Go for it. These were big films. These were popular films. I think Roger Moore did a fantastic job as James Bond in Live and Let Die. He never showed any flinching. He took over the role. Was he different than Sean Connery? Of course. He suited the role for his acting style and his razor wit, but he did a great job. We all look forward to seeing and hearing from you again as we go on to the next film in the series, The Man with the Golden Gun. I'm Matt Sherman from James Bond Fan Events YouTube channel and BondFanEvents.com. Thank you, StarPodLog listeners.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.